Hi, everyone. We all carry around old versions of ourselves like photo albums in our minds. Snapshots of who we were in college, in that old job, in that first relationship, in that season of survival. And sometimes we start to confuse honoring those past versions of ourselves with staying loyal to them. We treat old identities like contracts we're not allowed to break, even when they're outdated. But the truth is, who you were 5 years ago, 2 years ago, or even last month wasn't the final draft of you. You're not a brand to protect. You're a human being meant to evolve. There's this invisible pressure to stay consistent, especially when people know you a certain way. Maybe you were always the reliable one, or the easygoing one, or the strong one. And now you're changing. You're asking for more. You're questioning the things you used to go along with. And the moment you start to shift, someone, maybe even your own inner critic, whispers, "Who do you think you are?" That whisper is shame disguised as loyalty. It's trying to convince you that your growth is betrayal, that moving forward is abandoning your roots. But growth isn't betrayal, it's honest evolution. What makes this so tricky is that change often feels like disloyalty before it feels like freedom. You might be outgrowing an environment that once felt like home. You might be evolving past beliefs you used to hold sacred. You might be stepping into a version of yourself that doesn't align with the narrative others have about you. And it's hard because we want to be liked, we want to be seen, and we've been taught that staying the same is safe, even if staying the same is slowly suffocating us. So we perform. We try to keep the peace. We keep showing up as who we were long after that version of ourselves has expired. But you can't heal in places that only recognize your wounds, and you can't grow in rooms that punish your expansion. Loyalty to your old self can start to feel like a cage. And no matter how beautifully decorated that cage is, it's still a place where your wings are clipped. Here's the part that nobody talks about enough: the grief that comes with growth. Outgrowing your old life, your old beliefs, your old roles. It hurts, even when it's necessary, even when it's right. You might feel like you're letting people down. You might lose relationships that only made sense when you were playing small. But grief is a natural companion to transformation. Letting go is not failure. It's the space between no longer and not yet. We have to stop glorifying self-abandonment as humility. There is nothing noble about staying silent when you found your voice. There is nothing admirable about dimming your light so others feel comfortable. That's not humility. That's fear in disguise. Real humility is rooted in truth. And sometimes the most honest thing you can do is say, "I'm not that person anymore." So if you're wrestling with whether evolving means you're being disloyal, I want you to consider this. Maybe staying stuck would be the real betrayal, not to them, but to yourself, to the version of you that's trying to emerge, to the wisdom you've earned, to the dreams that keep pulling at you even when you try to silence them. The people who love you will adjust. The ones who don't, maybe they were only ever in love with the version of you who made them feel safe. Growth doesn't need permission, it just needs truth. You're allowed to change. You're allowed to shift. You're allowed to say, "That version of me served her purpose, and I'm grateful, but I'm no longer her." That's not betrayal. That's the bravest kind of self-respect. There's a moment, sometimes quiet, sometimes loud, when you start to realize you're not who you used to be. Maybe your values are changing. Maybe your capacity is different. Maybe what used to fulfill you now feels hollow. That's the beginning of the shift. But right on its heels comes another feeling, less welcome, harder to name: shame. Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because the act of changing, even when it's healthy, even when it's necessary, challenges everything and everyone that's grown used to the older version of you. Shame sneaks in during transitions. It tells you that wanting something different means you're ungrateful, that drawing boundaries means you're selfish, that saying no means you've become cold. When you start choosing yourself, not in a self-centered way, but in a self-honoring way, the people pleaser inside you panic, and shame feeds off that panic. It tells you that your growth is a burden, that your clarity is arrogance, that your truth is too much, so you shrink, second guess, and sometimes sabotage the shift before it has a chance to settle in. We don't talk enough about how uncomfortable it is to outgrow a narrative. Maybe you were the dependable one, always available. Maybe you were the go along to get along one. Maybe you were the overachiever who got validation from being on all the time. When you begin to rewrite those roles, even gently, shame shows up and says, who are you without that? It frames your growth as disloyalty. It frames your boundaries as betrayal. And if we're not careful, we'll confuse shame with a moral compass when really it's just a leftover echo from a time when survival depended on fitting in. You see, shame isn't always about doing something bad. Sometimes it's about doing something new and having no map for it, especially if you come from environments where change wasn't modeled with grace, where evolving was seen as rejecting your roots, where asking for more was labeled as ungrateful. So your nervous system isn't just adjusting to the shift, it's bracing for judgment, for whispers, for the fear of being misunderstood. And that's where the real work begins, not in silencing the shame, but in naming it and refusing to let it drive. Here's the thing, shame loses power when it's spoken. When you say, I'm changing and it feels lonely, you invite connection instead of isolation. When you admit, this new version of me doesn't have it all figured out yet, you make space for grace. When you whisper, I'm scared people won't love this version of me, and someone replies, I do, that's healing. And sometimes you'll have to be that voice for yourself. You'll have to look in the mirror and say, I know this is hard, but we're not going back. There will be people who don't understand your shift. Some will guilt you. Some will outgrow you in return. Some will want the old you back because the old you made their life easier. And that's painful. But it doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. It means you're doing something real. Shame will tell you to dim your light so others feel comfortable. But healing means learning to shine and sit with the discomfort of not being understood. It means choosing truth over approval, integrity over image. So when shame shows up in your shift, and it will, greet it, name it, and keep moving. Don't let it make your transformation feel like a crime. You are not selfish for changing. You are not ungrateful for growing. You are not wrong for wanting more. Shame is loud, but it's not wise. Listen instead to the quiet voice inside you, the one that's calling you home, not back to who you were, but forward into who you're becoming. There's a moment, often early on, sometimes all at once, when you begin to notice that your fullness makes people uncomfortable. Your laughter is too loud, your honesty is too raw, your ambition is too obvious, your boundaries are too firm. And at first you think maybe it's just a moment, maybe it's just this person, but over time it begins to accumulate these micro senses that say, tone it down, make it softer, smaller, easier to swallow. That's how the myth of too much starts to settle in. We're taught, especially those of us socialized as women, caregivers, or peacekeepers, to be digestible, not just kind, but convenient, not just humble, but invisible when necessary. We start to believe that our power needs to be packaged, that our feelings are only valid if they're calm, that our needs are only reasonable if they don't disrupt anyone else's comfort. And so we become master editors of ourselves, shaving off edges, swallowing truth, shrinking joy. But here's the thing. There is no amount of shrinking that will ever be enough for someone committed to misunderstanding you. The label too much is almost never about you. It's about the places where your freedom pokes at someone else's fear, where your voice threatens the silence they've gotten used to, where your presence challenges the power dynamics they benefit from. When someone calls you too much, they're often saying, you are more than I know how to handle while staying exactly who I am, and that's not your problem to solve. The myth of too much is especially sticky because it's often wrapped in concern. I just worry you're being too sensitive. You're just really intense about this. You always want so much. These phrases are dressed in care but rooted in control. They're not about love. They're about limitation. And when you hear them often enough, they become internalized. You start to self-monitor. You apologize for things you haven't done wrong. You withhold ideas, affection, and truth, not because you want to, but because you've been taught your wholeness is a liability. But here's what no one tells you. The parts of you that are too much in one room will be the exact things that are celebrated in another. Your depth isn't a flaw, it's a feature. Your passion isn't a burden, it's a gift. Your intensity isn't something to fix, it's a sign you feel things deeply, and that is not a weakness. The problem isn't that you're too much, it's that some people are only comfortable around versions of you that keep them unchallenged. And you're not here to be palatable, you're here to be true. What often happens is that we spend so long trying to earn love by being easier to hold that we forget we were never meant to be easy, we were meant to be real. And love that only exists when you're edited isn't love. It's approval, it's performance, it's conditional safety. And that's not what your soul is hungry for. Your soul wants freedom, not tolerance, resonance, not quiet compliance. And the truth is, you can only be truly seen when you stop hiding behind enoughness and start standing in your muchness. The myth of too much teaches you to betray yourself quietly. But healing asks you to reclaim yourself boldly, to stop asking, how can I be less, and start wondering, where can I be more fully myself? That might mean disappointing people who were never meant to define your worth. It might mean shedding roles that kept you small. It might mean speaking louder, crying harder, laughing deeper, loving wider. It might mean becoming a version of you that finally feels like home. We don't talk enough about the quiet ache that comes with becoming. Growth is often sold to us like a self-help success story, empowering, clean, upward, forward. But real growth, the kind that requires you to shed old skins, rewrite entire narratives, and leave behind parts of your life that once felt like everything, that kind of growth comes with grief. It's not just a celebration. It's a reckoning, a letting go, a funeral for versions of you that didn't make it into the next chapter. You can love something and still know it's time to walk away from it. That's one of the hardest truths about evolution. Sometimes we have to mourn the life we built with the tools we had before we knew better. Friendships you thought would last forever suddenly feel misaligned. Dreams that once lit you up now feel like echoes. Roles you played, caregiver, achiever, people pleaser, peacekeeper, they start to feel like costume. And as you take them off, you realize you weren't just performing for others, you were performing for yourself too. There's grief in that awareness, a tenderness, because even if those versions of you were unsustainable, they were familiar, they protected you, they helped you belong, they got you through, and it's okay to miss them even as you choose to outgrow them. We often confuse grieving something with wanting it back, but you can miss what something was without needing it now. You can hold gratitude and sadness in the same breath. That's what makes it human. That's what makes it real. What makes the grief of growth even more complicated is that not everyone around you will understand it. They'll see the upgrade, the new boundary, the stronger voice, the clearer self, and they'll assume it's all gain. But what they don't see are the losses you're carrying quietly. the unreturned calls, the friendships that faded, the rituals that don't fit anymore. The ache of no longer belonging in the rooms you used to call home. It's lonely, sometimes unbearably so, to keep growing when others stay the same. And if you're not careful, that loneliness will try to convince you to go back. It will romanticize the old life. It will whisper, maybe it wasn't so bad. Maybe you were too harsh. Maybe you could make it work if you just... But nostalgia is sneaky. It edits out the pain and only plays back the highlight reel. Growth asks you to stay present, to feel the ache without making it mean you made the wrong choice. Sometimes the pain of leaving isn't a sign you should have stayed. It's just the price of choosing your truth. There's also the grief of being misunderstood. When you grow, you start moving in ways that don't make sense to people who are still tethered to the old version of you. They might question your intentions. They might take it personally. They might make you the villain in a story that doesn't belong to you anymore. And it hurts not because their approval defines you, but because you hoped they'd come with you. But part of healing is learning to bless people on their journey, even if they're not meant to walk beside you anymore. What we rarely say out loud is that growing also means breaking your own heart sometimes. You have to let go of places where you no longer belong. You have to release relationships that only worked when you were pretending. You have to mourn the timeline you thought you'd be on. And none of that makes you weak or selfish or dramatic. It makes you alive. It means you're choosing integrity over comfort, wholeness over performance, depth over ease. So let yourself grieve. Don't rush to silver lining it. Don't bypass the pain with productivity. Let the tears come. Let the silence stretch. Let yourself sit in the sacred discomfort of outgrowing what no longer fits. Because the grief of growth isn't a sign you're lost. It's evidence you're transforming. And even though it hurts, you're not breaking down. You're breaking open. In a world that rewards performance and external validation, choosing integrity over image can feel like swimming upstream. We're taught from an early age that how we appear, the face we present to the world, the persona we cultivate, is just as important, if not more, than who we actually are underneath. But when you begin to make integrity your guiding force, you realize that image is an illusion. It's a mask, one that hides your authenticity in exchange for a version of you that fits into neat, comfortable boxes. But you were never meant to live in those boxes. Integrity asks you to show up as you are without the polished facade. It asks you to speak your truth, even when it feels uncomfortable, even when it risks disapproval. It asks you to make decisions based on what aligns with your values, not what will get you ahead or win you favor. And it's not easy. In fact, it's one of the most courageous choices you'll ever make, because living authentically will make you vulnerable. It will make you visible. And visibility always comes with a risk of judgment, rejection, or misunderstanding. The truth about image is that it's something we create to protect ourselves. It's the version of us that fits the expectations of others. The one that's always put together, always saying the right things, always playing the role that makes us most acceptable. But when we choose to prioritize our image, we sacrifice the deeper, messier parts of ourselves that are just as worthy of being seen. And those parts, the ones that are raw, imperfect, and true, are the ones that need to be expressed. Choosing integrity over image means accepting that being real may not make you popular, but it will make you free. There is a moment, usually in your 30s or 40s, when the weight of maintaining an image becomes too much. The mask becomes too tight. You start realizing that pretending to be something you're not is exhausting. You feel the internal dissonance between what you project to the world and what you actually feel. It's like carrying a heavy load with every interaction, every decision, every word you speak. But what happens when you decide to put down the mask? You begin to reclaim your energy, your peace, and your truth. It's like exhaling after holding your breath for too long. Choosing integrity is about aligning your actions with your beliefs. It's about refusing to compromise your values for the sake of acceptance or external approval. It's about being honest with yourself first before trying to navigate how the world will perceive you. And let's be clear, it's not about being perfect. Integrity isn't a rigid code of conduct that demands flawless behavior. It's about honoring your truth, even when it's complicated or uncomfortable. It's about saying, this is who I am, even if it doesn't fit into anyone else's neat little box. It's also about embracing vulnerability. When you choose integrity, you choose to be seen fully, openly, and sometimes awkwardly. There's no hiding behind a curated image, no more editing yourself to fit a mold. And in a world that constantly pressures us to present our best, most polished selves, showing up as your true, unfiltered self can feel like a radical act. But the more you choose this radical honesty, the more you create space for others to do the same. You set an example, not of perfection, but of authenticity. The cost of living with image over integrity is deep. It's the cost of never truly knowing yourself because you've spent your life trying to conform to everyone else's expectations. It's the cost of constantly questioning your worth because you're measuring it against someone else's standards. But when you choose integrity, you step into your power, you reclaim your voice, you stop living in the shadow of who you think you should be and start living in the fullness of who you already are. And that's a power no one can take from you. When you choose integrity over image, you also free yourself from the fear of judgment. You stop chasing approval because you've already given it to yourself. You stop shrinking, apologizing, and dimming your light to fit into someone else's definition of what is acceptable. You stop living for the likes, the validation, and the external applause. And in doing so, you find something far more valuable: inner peace. You find the quiet strength that comes from being true to yourself. The kind of strength that doesn't need to shout, but speaks loudly in the authenticity of your actions and the consistency of your values.